He raped me. I had no choice. I had to do it. These were the chilling words Victoria Rickman uttered to a 911 operator on a September night in 2013. What followed was a crime scene so gruesome, so complicated, that even the most seasoned detectives struggled to make sense of it. A wealthy Atlanta suburb became the backdrop for a tale of passion, betrayal, and deadly consequences, one that would send shockwaves through the community and leave a nation divided. Was Victoria a helpless victim pushed to the brink by a monstrous predator? Or was she a master manipulator spinning a web of lies to escape justice? The truth, buried beneath layers of deception, would only come to light in the most shocking way imaginable. Buckle up, because this is a case that blurs the line between self-defense and cold-blooded murder. And once you know the truth, you'll never look at it the same way again. It was the dead of night, 3 a.m. September 13, 2013, when police received a call from a woman named Victoria Rickman. She was hysterical, panicked, and distressed, claiming she'd just shot a man. The reason? The man had raped her. The victim's name was Will Carter Jr., her on-again, off-again boyfriend. Sounds like self-defense, but as detectives began connecting the dots, the tale took an unexpected turn. Will and Victoria had a complicated, messy history. Will was a self-employed businessman with his own house. The crime scene was chilling. 9 bullets, 3 in his back. No struggle, nothing to indicate he had threatened her. Victoria claimed Will had been abusing her for years, physically, emotionally, sexually. But investigators weren't believing it because her story had too many gaps. She said she had to reload her weapon, but proof indicated otherwise. What was extremely surprising that she had a history of reporting rapes that never quite panned out. But in this case, there was no concrete evidence that Will had raped her. No bruises, no scratches. Lead investigator Detective Summer Benton didn't view this as self-defense. To her, it appeared pre-planned. And then there was the hammer thing. A year prior to the shooting, Will had reported the police on Victoria, saying that she attacked him with a hammer and bitten him. She'd said it was also self-defense, a second incident of attempted sexual assault. Will got arrested, but Victoria later had the charges dropped. Even his father had warned him about her, telling him that she was a danger. But Will didn't heed the warning, so the case erupted, and the deeper detectives dug, the more it began to look as though Victoria, too, had chalked out the whole thing. And there was more. Only a few months before Will's death, a video had appeared on Victoria's phone. It revealed her attempting to enter his home while Will, obviously frightened, ordered her to leave. Shortly thereafter, she was arrested, and that case remained open when she killed him. When Detective Benton read through his autopsy report, it was dismal. The victim, Will Carter, didn't indicate any attempt to fight back, and there was no indication of a struggle. Victoria went through a rape exam, which revealed she had sex, but there were no severe injuries. Hospital records indicated bruises on her arm and leg, but Benton had already reported that there were no injuries. Will had been shot initially while standing near Victoria's bed near the window. The bullet pierced his lungs, spattering blood on the wall. He fell to the bed, and that's when shots came again, straight into his chest and head. If it were self-defense, why shoot him so multiple times, and why were Victoria's nails clean? No scratches, no defensive wounds. Even the rape kit revealed nothing in the way of injuries, only evidence that they had spent the night together. Naturally, by lunchtime that afternoon, Victoria was arrested for murder by noon on September 13, 2013, only hours after the shooting. She didn't shed tears at all. She didn't protest. She didn't even deny it. In the meantime, Will's parents, William Sr. and Carol, were distraught. They couldn't understand their son not being able to recognize the threat in Victoria, despite Will having a troubled past, arrests for property destruction and drug problems. Nevertheless, he was able to turn his life around, finish rehab, and become an entrepreneur. His family suspected his relationship with Victoria could have been another addiction. So they had always been concerned about Victoria's hold on him, but now their son was gone. Will had a history of drug addiction, years of trying to get clean, even opened up his own company. But his relationship with Victoria had been poisoned. 4 months prior to the shooting, she'd made a police report, produced pictures of bruises. She attempted to file a restraining order, but the office was out of business. A deputy sheriff, Rick Price, noticed the bruises, feared for her well-being, and gave her a gun. Use it if you need to, he advised, and that was the one with which she assassinated Will. Once arrested, Victoria was not granted bail and was detained in DeKalb County Jail. She insisted on telling everyone that she shot Will in self-defense, since he was drunk and belligerent. Victoria's opinions were everywhere. In jailhouse video interviews, she repeatedly said the same thing. It was self-defense. Will had been drinking, he was violent, and she had no other choice. But the police never did a toxicology test. Benton confessed later that she never even requested one. By the time Victoria's lawyers asked about it, Will's blood sample had already been disposed of, so they lose the opportunity. But Benton thought Victoria was being manipulative, and Rick Price, the sheriff who had given her the gun, believed her. He had seen her with a black eye and bruises months earlier. He even took her to a shooting range so she could practice using the gun. But when Victoria killed Will, her first call wasn't to 911, it was to Rick Price. They talked for 2 minutes before she finally called the cops. That made investigators suspicious. Was Price merely involved in this? Is it a sinister plan made by two? One thing was certain, this wasn't a matter of simple self-defense, rather a cold-blooded murder. Clearly, it was a stressful night. Victoria Rickman instructed her long-term friend, Andrew Scarr, to stay over at his mother's house. She needed time by herself. Shortly after, she was on the telephone with Will Carter. No one is quite sure what they were discussing, but around midnight sometime, Will appeared at her residence. And what happened next was fatal. From 12:20 to 2:15 a.m., Victoria fired at Will several times, later painting it as self-defense. She explained that he had raped her and she was afraid for her life. Forensics indicated the shots were fired from close range, between 6 inches and 2 feet. The first bullet struck him in the chest, and he turned, stood up, coughed, blood splattered on the wall. But Victoria continued firing. As he fell, she finished him with 2 final bullets in his head. It was panic. They claimed it all was a matter of she still feared she was threatened even when firing and firing away. But anyway, detectives weren't buying it. They dismantled the crime scene, scoured evidence, and dug through Victoria's phone. What did they discover? A whopping 66,000 texts, 4,000 pages of messages. This was the foundation of the prosecution's argument. Now fast forward nearly 4 years. August 22, 2017, Victoria's trial began. Her dad, Paul Rickman, was optimistic his daughter would be acquitted. Will Carter's parents, on the other hand, were there determined to get justice for their son. In the argument, prosecutor Sheila Ross characterized Victoria as being motivated by rage, not fear. She mentioned their tumultuous on-again, off-again relationship, including an incident in 2013 when Victoria recorded a heated argument at Will's residence. The video? A toxic mess with Will visibly agitated and terrified. Ross instructed the jury to disregard accusations of abuse and PTSD. She claimed this was cold, calculated murder. On the other hand, Victoria's defense team, led by Amanda Clark Palmer, framed it as a classic case of domestic violence. Will, they argued, had been abusive for years, physically, verbally, emotionally. Victoria was terrified. She believed Will would kill her that night. The defense even criticized the police, saying they rushed to judgment and didn't investigate properly. You see, the trial had been a clash of perception. Is Victoria a rape victim who battled back, or a woman who premeditated the murder of her ex-boyfriend? On the second day of trial, Detective Benton testified. The prosecution peppered her with questions: forced entry, struggle, injuries on Will's face. Benton's response to all: no. But the defense objected. What about the lamp knocked over? The sound machine dangling off the nightstand? Signs of a fight, they contended. Benton admitted these, but maintained it wasn't enough to indicate a struggle. Then the gun arrived, a .40 caliber semi-automatic, and it held 12 rounds, but the math didn't add up, and there were 9 shell casings found and 4 bullets still in the gun. That was 13 rounds. The only explanation was that Victoria had reloaded, and that's why it was an evidence of premeditation, not self-defense. The defense attempted to pick holes in this. Perhaps Benton had made an error. Perhaps it wasn't a reload, but she would not budge. Next was Detective Kevin Leon Patcher, the phone technician. He analyzed Victoria's texts from the evening of the shooting. Will had dumped her, it turned out, because he was angry, and his final text was, "You are too dangerous to be around. "Never call me or the mother of my child again." It was only the beginning. Leon discovered messages Victoria sent to a friend, that deputy sheriff, informing him she was afraid Will would charge her with something. It could be a motive, the prosecution said, but the hardest hit for Victoria's defense, it was the selfies. Leon discovered pictures on her phone of bruises on her arm, 24 hours before the shooting. She had asserted those bruises were a result of the attack on that night. But what contradicted her was the timestamp. In spite of all the evidence piling up, Victoria had strong support from her father, close friends, and a longtime friend, Andrew Scarr. They believed her. But belief was not sufficient. The forensic evidence and those incriminating selfies placed her story in real jeopardy. And then there was Rick Price, the deputy sheriff who had provided Victoria with the gun. He testified that he had met her months earlier when she had applied for a protective order. He remembered noticing bruises and black circles around her eyes. He even acknowledged being attracted to her but not having a romantic relationship with her. And 5 days after the shooting, he was dismissed from his job for not cooperating with the investigation. Finally, the trial came down to this. Was Victoria a battered woman defending her life, or had she deliberately killed Will Carter? That was up to the jury. Meanwhile, there was Will's psychiatrist, Dr. John Lockridge. He also testified that Will had been experiencing delusions just before he died, believing he was on television and speaking through it. He had been prescribed anxiety medication, but no toxicology test was ever conducted to determine if he had taken it. But surprisingly, Victoria said he had resumed using illegal substances, which made him violent. Anyway, the bombshell came from Dr. Chris Lee Sperry, a retired chief medical examiner. He refuted the prosecution, stating Will wasn't shot in the back initially, he was shot in the chest. That meant he was probably facing Victoria when the gunfire began, which created another level of doubt. At the same time, Victoria had bruises. There had been witnesses to them and even police officers before the shooting. Fingerprint-shaped marks on her arms, throat, and black eyes. She didn't take the stand, but her attorney used a tape recording from the day of the shooting, when she was obviously upset. The prosecution wasn't accepting the defense of self-defense. They believed the last shot to Will's head was cold-blooded murder. As you can guess, the closing arguments were heated. Prosecutor Sheila Ross rejected the notion that Victoria was a victim. She was a killer, period. But the defense countered, claiming Victoria couldn't have plotted the murder because she didn't even know Will was visiting that evening. Then Detective Benton arrived, and the defense shredded her, claiming that she was more interested in gaining TV exposure because a reality show team had been filming the case than in a careful investigation. They questioned her contradictions and indicated she disregarded evidence that conflicted with her hypothesis. Finally, jury deliberations began late on the Friday before Labor Day weekend. And the verdict? Guilty on all counts, including malice murder. 5 weeks into the trial, it was time for sentencing. There was no drama. Victoria was off to prison for life. The only uncertainty was whether she'd ever see the parole board. When she finally broke her silence, she still labeled herself a victim of abuse and pleaded for her dignity and freedom. But the judge noted one thing: she never apologized. Considering everything, the judge imposed a life sentence without parole. So, in simple terms, the case had it all: love, violence, betrayal, and a courtroom struggle that had people divided. Was Victoria a battered woman who snapped? Or was she a manipulative one who had intended to kill Will from the beginning? The jury made up their minds, but to this day people continue to argue about whether justice was really served. What if they just jailed a number Me Too victim, just because there was not enough evidence to get the 100% truth? The irony is that only 2 days after, Will Carter Jr. would have been celebrating his 35th birthday. Instead, his mother is mourning, not only for the son she lost, but for the granddaughter he left behind. She remembers all the things he will never get to experience: her growing up, her graduation, perhaps even her wedding. But she clings to his memory, taking solace in keeping his spirit alive. Even in defeat, fragments of Will exist. His dog Loki still does. His faithful friend, now nearly 13 years old, defying all expectations for his type. When Will's mother observes Loki paddling, she is certain that she can still sense her son's presence. It's a tiny, cherished reminder of a life cut short. The pain never quite recedes, but she holds on to these flashbacks, resolute to keep going and pay tribute to the son she lost. But the question remains, was she a desperate survivor fighting for her life, or a cold-blooded killer weaving a web of lies? Did the justice system get it right, or was there more to the story than we'll ever know? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was this self-defense or something far more sinister? And if you love diving into true crime mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a case that'll keep you up at night. See you in the next one.